title I've been given is Miraculous Boldness. Miraculous Boldness. I've got 3 points for you. Miraculous boldness is produced by desperation. Point number 2. Miraculous boldness is produced by desperation. Point number 3. Miraculous boldness is produced by desperation. What is a miracle? An event requiring supernatural power of God. Like being married to an Australian woman. That's a miracle. What is boldness? Bold in Greek means parrhesia. It has 2 root words, pas, which means all, and the second is recess, which means to tell. So boldness means you got to be willing to tell it all. Today we're going to look at a couple of guys that are not necessarily winners by any stretch of the imagination. These are people that we can learn from. You know, oftentimes we think a lesson like this, you look at all the really courageous people, but we're going to look at 4 losers. 4 losers. You can be one of those tonight. 2 Kings chapter 6. 2 Kings chapter 6, verse 24. Sometime later, Ben-Hadad, king of Aram, mobilized his entire army and marched up and laid siege to Samaria. There was a great famine in the city, and the siege lasted so long a donkey's head sold for 80 shekels of silver and a quart of a cab of seed pod for 5 shekels. Right here we find that the city was under siege. What is a siege? It's when you starve a city into submission because you could not take the city out. You starve the city of physical water. You starve the city of physical food. You starve the city of physical communication. And yet we understand that from a spiritual standpoint, I believe that there are several cities that are still under siege. Being starved of the living water. Being starved of the physical food, that's evangelism. Being starved of their communication, their prayer life. A city under siege. Needing men that are desperate to get the good news out. I believe we are starving. I believe that London is starving. I believe Sydney is starving. Sydney is a city under siege. 1 out of 3 Australians report loneliness. 8.6 Australians commit suicide every day. 75% of them are men. 65,000 Australians attempt suicide every year. Suicide is the leading cause of death of 14 to 44-year-olds. The LGBT community reports statistics 10 times higher than the ones I just read. You can read about that in the Australian Research Center, Sex, Health, and Society, 2021. Right now, I really believe families are under siege. Communities are under siege. Cities are under siege. Christianity is under siege. Masculinity is under siege. God's beautiful essence of women are under siege. Sexuality is under siege. The Bible is under siege. And if we are not bold, your soul could be under siege. 2 Kings chapter 7 verse 3 talks about these 4 guys. And the Bible just says they were lepers. It says they were lepers and the siege gets lifted. And it says, verse 3 says, now there were 4 men with leprosy at the entrance of the city gate. They said to each other, why stay here until we die? If we say we'll go into the city, the famine's there. And we will die. If we stay at home here, we will die. So let's go over to the camp of the Arameans and surrender. If they spare us, we will live. If they kill us, then we will die.
Come on, bro.
You got to die for a miracle. You got to be willing to die. These 4 lepers they say, we're not going to sit here. And we understand that we live in a time where people want to sit in their skepticism. They want to sit in their atheism, sit in their faithlessness. They say, we're not going to sit here and die.
Come on, Michael.
But what's so powerful is they were lepers. They weren't desperate because they were necessarily talented or brave. They just had a desperation that saved the nation. And God, because they decided to be desperate, God did something miraculous. He did a miracle. because of their desperation. I really believe if we want to see miraculous, if we want to see miracles, there's got to be a desperation in our hearts. A desperation where it's not about being talented or brave enough. Just say, hey, I can't sit here. I can't sit here. What did God do? They get over to the camp, and in verse 9 it says, they said to each other, what we're doing is not right. Why do they say that? Because they get blessed. They get to the camp, and all the enemies are taken out. God did an incredible miracle. And it says this day is a day of good news, and we're keeping it to ourselves. So they go back and they tell their brothers. And of course, at the end of the story, they saved the nation. Their miraculous boldness is produced, or miraculous boldness is produced by desperation. They were in a desperate situation, and God did a miracle. God did a miracle. I'm so fired up about the European world sector. I'm so fired up about a 12-year-old boy who confronted his teacher in Oxford. He said, why are you teaching LGBT things while we're learning math? And he stood up in class and confronted his teacher. Well, I think it helps that 3 weeks prior to that, he was baptized by my son. Young Joel says, I want to save all the teens in Oxford. When I think about miraculous boldness, I think about Victor Masanikov and Sandra Smith. Victor, in 2 weeks' notice, went to Poland and planted that church. He's gone into war-torn Kiev and Lviv twice because of his desperation to save the nation. When I think about miraculous boldness, I think about G and Themis. Why are they going there? They're going there out of their desperation to save their nation. Their desperation to save their nation. It is time for us to go back to our cities with the spirit of desperation. I love you, and to God be all the glory.